Hey guys, welcome back for today's video where I want to talk about the 2020 Senate map, going through the 34 contests and giving the lean on where I say things at this very early on point in the process. Now, we still obviously have a very long way to go, and we actually don't even know who's going to be running on the Democratic or Republican side in a number of these races. So this is just a very rough draft here. I was looking through the Senate map the other day and putting together my thoughts, so I thought I'd put together a video talking about my thoughts on these races. So we'll start out in the West and then move our way over to the East. This is a much more favorable map for the Democrats in 2020 compared to what they had. It was just a disastrously tough map for them back in 2018. There's 34 races up for grabs. 22 of them are being defended by the Republicans, 12 for the Democrats. So we'll start in Oregon. This is a really safe one for the Democrats. Jeff Merkley, the incumbent, almost a complete shoo-in to go on and win his re-election there out in the state of Oregon. So then we move over to Idaho, a very Republican state. This is going to be a safe one. They have the incumbent there with Jim Rich. And then we go over to the state of Montana. This is where we actually start getting a little bit more interesting. So Steve Daines is the Republican incumbent. And right now, we don't know who's going to be running on the Democratic side. Unfortunately for Democrats, it's a situation where the Democratic governor has thrown his hat in the ring to run for the presidency. I think he'd be much better served to try to go on and win this Senate seat and flip it over to the Democrats. Obviously, the Democrats won their Senate seat in 2018 with incumbent Jon Tester winning that one. And if Bullock went on and ran here for the Democrats going against Daines, I think it would be pretty close to a toss-up if that was the situation. And we're going to get this in a lot of these matchups where there's states where Republicans have incumbents, and there's very strong potential Democrats that could run in these races, but a lot of the time these Democrats are running for the presidency or have said that they're not going to be running for these Senate races potentially. So it's making things probably a little bit tougher for the Democrats to try to flip the Senate to their side. But right now in Montana, you have to give the lean over to the Republicans with Steve Daines, given the fact that Bullock might not be running on the Democrat side. But if it is Bullock running, then that would give the Democrats a possibility. Then we have Wyoming here, one of the most Republican states in the country. Definitely, no matter who they run here and have as their party nominee, the Republicans likely to take that one and keep it on their side. So then we have Colorado. And this one, it feels like incumbent Republican Cory Gardner is going to have a really tough time trying to keep this seat. If we're trying to contrast this to a similar type of seat on the other side back in 2018, you might kind of compare this to what North Dakota had in 2018 with Heidi Heitkamp trying to defend that. A really tough scenario. Cory Gardner, the polling that we've seen early on just against a generic Democrat has not looked good for him. I would give this one as a lean over the Democrats to flip it to their side. They still have to take down an incumbent, which can lead to some tough scenarios to try to break through, but it does feel like pretty much no matter who the Democrats put up here, it feels likely that they're going to go on and flip this one over to their side. And then we have Arizona, Martha McSally, the incumbent here. She was appointed to the seat, and if we look back at 2018, Martha McSally ran against Kyrsten Sinema, and she came up short, losing that head-to-head Senate matchup, and she could very well go on and lose this race as well. It looks like the astronaut Kelly might be running, or is going to be running on the Democrat side, and he's going to have a pretty strong chance at potentially picking up this seat for the Democrats, and I would give them the lean to go on and take that one in Arizona. And then New Mexico, pretty consistently blue state. No matter who the nominee is on either the Democratic or Republican side, it feels like this one is going to be a pretty safe bet for the Democrats to keep. Moving over to the state of Texas, this is another one of these races, kind of like Montana. If Beto O'Rourke was running on the Democrat side, you'd think that it would be right around that toss-up range. He had a really strong campaign against Ted Cruz, only came up short by a couple of percentage points. John Cornyn, not quite as well known in the state of Texas as Ted Cruz. Perhaps Beto O'Rourke could break through and win this time around if he ran for this Senate seat. We don't know how his presidential bid is going to go. For the Democrats' sake, I think a lot of people are hoping that O'Rourke ends up running for this Senate seat. But given how it is right now, we still got to give the lean over to the Republicans with John Cornyn, since we don't know if O'Rourke is running on the Democrat side. And even if it was O'Rourke running for the Democrats, they still probably give the slight lean to John Cornyn, pending some more data that might suggest otherwise. So then moving up to Oklahoma, pretty safe red state. Jim Inhofe, the incumbent, pretty safe bet to go on and win that one. Then we have Kansas. This is an open seat. And it's a situation where I'm going to put it one stage below being solid red. Kansas, their statewide elections, you tend to get Republicans winning them. But we did just have in 2018 the governor's race in Kansas going to the Democrats, so there is potential hope for them if they have a really strong candidate, and maybe if the Republicans don't have a strong candidate, that they could mount some type of an effort to flip this state, but definitely going to be giving it as a lean to the Republicans right now. Moving up to Nebraska, very safe one here. Incumbent Ben Sasse likely to go on and win his re-election bid. Also South Dakota, very safe for the Republicans to go on and keep that one with Mike Rounds, the incumbent. Moving over to the state of Minnesota, I think this one is really safe for the Democrats as well. Tina Smith, she just won her special election in 2018, and the Democrats have been looking really strong in Minnesota in recent years, and it would be quite surprising if Tina Smith wasn't able to go on and win her re-election bid in 2020. Then we have Iowa, going to be giving this one as just a slight lean to the Republicans. I think that this is a seat that the Democrats have to target if they're going to try to potentially capture the majority in the Senate. They have incumbent Joni Ernst on the Republican side. I'd like to see maybe somebody like a J.D. Scholten run on the Democratic side. He came up just short in that 4th congressional district of Iowa. So back in 2018, there's 4 congressional districts in Iowa. 3 of them went to the Democrats, the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd congressional districts. The 4th congressional district is the most Republican by quite a bit in this state, and J.D. Scholten came up just a hair short of flipping it to the Democrats. So if you're running in a statewide election and you can do pretty well in the 4th congressional district and then do about as well as you would expect a Democrat to do in the other 3 districts, and that would be a situation where you could potentially win a statewide election and flip this seat over to the Democrats. That's maybe a candidate that they could think of there. J.D. Scholten, maybe somebody else is going to run, but it should be a pretty competitive matchup here in the state of Iowa in 2020. Definitely one to keep an eye on. Then going to Illinois, very safe for the Democrats. Dick Durbin, the incumbent, a pretty safe bet to go on and win there. Arkansas, the incumbent Tom Cotton, a very safe bet to go on and win. Bill Cassidy, the incumbent in Louisiana, very likely to go on and win that one. Cindy Hyde-Smith, she just won her special election in 2018. Even though she had to battle her way through some controversy, and it was relatively competitive for a Senate race in Mississippi. Some people think that the Democrats could possibly make things interesting in this one. I'm just not buying it, especially with what we saw in 2018 where Hyde-Smith was able to come through despite the adversity that she had to push her way through. So that one's, in my opinion, feeling relatively safe for the Republicans. Tennessee, another one that's feeling relatively safe here. It's an open seat, but very Republican state, likely to go over to them. Now, Alabama, another interesting race here. So there's actually an incumbent on the Democrat side here. It's Doug Jones, a name that should be familiar to a lot of you guys. He obviously won the special election against Roy Moore. I'm not sure he's going to go against as weak of a candidate as Roy Moore this time around, but you never know if Roy Moore works his way in there and somehow is on the Republican side again. Perhaps Doug Jones could go on and win his re-election bid. But if Alabama just puts someone in here who's competent and doesn't turn off a lot of moderates or, just people that obviously had issues with all the controversy that was surrounding Roy Moore, it feels like in the state of Alabama that they have a pretty decent shot at flipping this one back over into Republican hands. Now, the state of Georgia should be pretty competitive here. You have incumbent Republican David Perdue. And this is another one of these states, kind of like Texas and Montana, where there's obviously a very strong potential Democratic candidate. We don't know if she's going to run for the presidency or what's in her future, but Stacey Abrams, obviously, in 2018, very competitive in the governor's race. If she ran for the Senate here, that would make things likely very competitive and interesting. We don't know exactly who's going to be on the Democrats' side. If they put up the right kind of candidate, this is a potential one on the radar where it could flip, but going to be giving the lean right now to the incumbent Republican David Perdue. Then we have Lindsey Graham, the incumbent in South Carolina. He feels like a pretty safe bet in a very Republican state. North Carolina, this should be in the realm of being pretty competitive. You still have the incumbent advantage with Tom Tillis, the Republican there in the state of North Carolina. We're not sure yet who's going to be the Democrat, who's the party nominee. Going to be giving this one as a lean to the Republicans, but should be very competitive in what's a relatively purple state here in North Carolina. Moving up to Kentucky, this is another state that could be very competitive. Mitch McConnell, the incumbent, consistently has the worst approval ratings for a senator in his home state. If the Democrats put up somebody who's well-known or well-liked throughout the state of Kentucky, It feels like the Democrats at least have a chance to potentially flip this one. Also, we're looking at a governor's race right now for 2019 in Kentucky that looks like it seems at least likely at this point that the Democrats are going to take this one. The polling that we've been seeing out of Kentucky has looked really good. There's a lot of hate for the Republican governor there in the state. So Kentucky is a state to keep an eye on here over the next couple of years. First with their governor's race in 2019, and then with this Senate race in 2020. But right now, giving the lean over to Mitch McConnell to win his re-election bid. Moving over to West Virginia, this feels like a pretty safe state for the Republicans. They have the incumbent with Shelley Capito. On the Democrat side, I would love to see somebody like a Richard Ojeda run. I think he could make things relatively interesting there. Not necessarily that he'd be able to go on and win it, but he'd definitely fight for the seat. He's a guy that has a lot of gusto behind his campaigning efforts. I think that could make things interesting potentially in West Virginia, but seems like a pretty safe one for the Republicans, possibly there. The Democrats were able to win in West Virginia with the incumbent Joe Manchin in 2018, but they don't have somebody like a Manchin with that type of approval and name recognition to go head-to-head in their 2020 bid. Moving over to Virginia, this one is a pretty safe one for the Democrats with incumbent Mark Warner. They had a Senate race in Virginia back in 2018 with Tim Kaine winning by a landslide. I think this one's also pretty safe here for Mark Warner. Moving up to the state of Michigan, incumbent Gary Peters. I actually think if the Republicans put up somebody who has good name recognition on the Republican side in the state of Michigan, that this thing could actually be relatively competitive. Maybe somebody like a Rick Snyder, possibly. I'm not sure if he even wants to run for the Senate, just a name to throw out there. I'd actually personally wouldn't mind to see Gary Peters get a challenge from the left in the state of Michigan. I'm a resident of the state of Michigan. Wouldn't mind seeing somebody challenge him, maybe like an Abdul El Sayed or another progressive, maybe somebody like a Matt Morgan who ran in the 1st Congressional District. Maybe at least pull Gary Peters a little bit more to the left. He's pretty corporate-friendly, military-friendly guy, maybe a little bit more centrist for Michigan than what the state is overall, but in this one, should be relatively safe, I think, for the Democrats. If it is Gary Peters running against somebody who has really strong name recognition on the Republican side, perhaps it could be somewhat competitive, so I'm going to put it one stage below being safe. All right, so now we're going to move out to the east here. Delaware, we have Christopher Coons, the incumbent Democrat. That's a pretty safe one for the Democrats, going to be dark blue. New Jersey, Cory Booker is the incumbent. It doesn't look like his presidential campaign is getting off the ground all that well. If he runs here, obviously, he would be a pretty safe bet to keep his Senate seat. And even if Cory Booker doesn't run for re-election for this Senate race, it would still feel like a pretty safe one in the state of New Jersey there, especially after Bob Menendez was able to win re-election by a relatively decent margin back in 2018. He has really poor favorability numbers. So if somebody like Menendez can win statewide in New Jersey just a couple of years back in 2018 compared to 2020, feels like a pretty safe bet there for the Democrats. Moving up to Rhode Island, Jack Reed, the incumbent. That's going to be a safe one for the Democrats. Massachusetts, Ed Markey, the Democratic incumbent. Very safe for the Democrats there as well. All right, now we actually have a couple of interesting states here in the Northeast. So New Hampshire, Jan Shaheen, the incumbent Democrat. People thought maybe this could be an interesting race if the Republican Governor Sununu ran on the Republican side. It doesn't look like he's going to be running for that Senate seat, so that makes this one a little bit safer for the Democrats, just going to put it one stage below being solid blue. And then we have the state of Maine, the incumbent Republican, Susan Collins, maybe the only other vulnerable Republican incumbent that's on the more vulnerable side than Collins would be Cory Gardner in the state of Colorado, or maybe Martha McSally in the state of Arizona, but relatively vulnerable here. She has won by considerable margins in the past, so that is something to keep in mind. The Democrats have to put up a very strong candidate here, but there's a lot of effort that's being put in by the Democrats to try to flip what is a blue state generally in these statewide elections. Also in 2018, all the congressional districts in Maine went to Democrats. They were able to take it. The more Republican district, it was flipped over to the Democrats. obviously, maybe that's somebody you want to run here in that Senate race. I believe his name was Golden, if I'm remembering correctly. He was able to win the 2nd Congressional District, which is a bit more Republican-leaning than your typical area here in the state of Maine, but that's definitely another race we're going to be keeping our eye on, but we're going to be giving the slight lean here to the Republicans with Susan Collins. And until we actually get more data on this one, who's going to be running on the Democrat side, or getting some head-to-head scenarios on how the polling might play out in these early on stages. And then we just have one other state here, almost forgot about it, over there in Alaska. The incumbent, Dan Sullivan, going to be a pretty safe bet to go on and win his re-election bid. So if everything goes as this current map is showing you, it would be a scenario where you'd have 48 Democrats and 52 Republicans. So if the Democrats took the presidency, it still wouldn't be enough to where they would have obviously Congress, the Senate, and the presidency to try to pass legislation. They'd still have to try to work through a Republican Senate, which means not much would get done. But it's not necessarily a terrible situation for the Democrats, because you see I have 8 that are just slight leans to the Republicans right now, and all of these races are potentially winnable for the Democrats if they run Bullock in Montana, if O'Rourke runs in Texas, if they pick somebody strong in Iowa and North Carolina, maybe Kentucky. If Stacey Abrams runs in Georgia, that could make things really interesting. Alabama, you just never know. Incumbent Doug Jones, he was able to win the statewide election last time around. Maybe he's able to keep some of that magic and continue this Democratic seat here in the state of Alabama, although it would be quite a surprise if he was able to do that. But there's definitely avenues for the Democrats to try to get to 50 seats, which is what would be needed if they won the presidency, because then the vice presidential tiebreaker would be in Democratic hands, or to get to 51 seats if Donald Trump won his re-election bid, then you'd have to get the majority there at 51. So that's going to wrap up this video, guys. These are all the thoughts that I was thinking about the other day. I just wanted to discuss where I had things leaning at this early point in time for that 2020 Senate map. So thanks for stopping by. Consider subscribing for more, and I hope to see you guys back here for further analysis videos in the future.